Hello and welcome to the Literature Cafe. Today we are going to focus on a very special and above all very controversial work of contemporary literature, namely American Psycho. And when we ask ourselves what actually makes great literature, we have to acknowledge that it shouldn't be something pleasant, comforting or reassuring. No, literature has the power and sometimes even the duty to challenge us, even to unsettle or disturb us. And American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis, does just that. He pushes the boundaries of what is tolerable, and then he goes one step further. And in doing so, he asks a profound question. How much do we ourselves risk becoming like Patrick Bateman? And this novel is not only a shocking spectacle, but also a stark warning. It is therefore no coincidence that Alice opens the novel with a quote from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. Both the author of these notes and the notes themselves are, of course, fictional. Nevertheless, such persons as the composer of these notes not only exist in our society, but indeed must exist, considering the circumstances under which our society has generally been formed. I have wished to bring before the public somewhat more distinctly than usual one of the characters of our recent past. He represents a generation that is still living out its days among us. Literary critics are often too quick to dismiss Patrick Bateman as a psychopath, but this label obscures something far more important. Bateman is not a unique anomaly. He is a product of his time, a figure whose counterparts not only exist in society, but as Dostoevsky suggests, must exist and will continue to exist. American Psycho exposes a disturbing emptiness and want of what can become when fully immersed in the allure of this world. But now let's take a closer look what we are actually reading here. So, published in 1991, the novel is set in New York in the late 1980s, an era marked by deregulation and the rapid rise of financialization. And here we meet Patrick Bateman, a 26-year-old investment banker who at first glance seems to be the ultimate winner of the system. He embodies every convention, enjoys every privilege, and lives a life draped in Armani suits and Valentino ties, frequenting the most exclusive restaurants and high-end clubs. So this is the world of the ultra-rich, people of unimaginable wealth who, despite having it all, are trapped in an endless cycle of self-promotion, work obsession, and ruthless comparison. Everyone plays a role, but no one seems to remember why. And Alice makes a conscious narrative choice by telling the story from Bateman's first-person perspective. Because at first glance, he seems not entirely unsympathetic, which makes his descent into madness all the more disturbing. The novel rejects conventional narrative structures at all. Bateman is a shallow, banal man, and the prose reflect this. Deliberately repetitive, often boring without a traditional suspense arc. Instead, we get a relentless stream of consumerist monologues, endless list of brand names, music reviews, and fine dining experiences. So the novel traps us inside Bateman's head, forcing us to endure this monotonous, empty world until we feel nauseous. And this nausea is deliberate because this book is not meant to be liked. Why no one is working. Karl Marx described capitalism as a system in which surplus value is accumulated through production. But in Patrick Bateman's world, production has disappeared. All that remains is endless consumption. Work disappears from perception, becomes invisible, abstract. It no longer matters what anyone is actually doing, only that they are in business. And financialization in general refers to the increasing dominance of the financial sector over the real economy. Profits are no longer made through production, but through speculation, derivatives, and the trading of intangible assets. Therefore, money multiplies itself. In American Psycho, we meet a generation of yuppies whose wealth is no longer tied to tangible labor, but to investment deals and self-perpetuating capital. The actual nature of their labor is absent. Patrick Bateman never has to even explain what his company is doing. It is enough that it trades, invests, and grows. But in what exactly? The novel is deliberately vague. Just as Bateman and his colleagues have no real understanding of their own industry, so the question becomes meaningless. Capital has become self-sustaining, self-replicating, and as Jean Baudrillard, to whose theories I will return later, writes in Symbolic Exchange and Death, today, this is no longer the case, since labor is no longer productive, but has become reproductive of the assignation to labor, which is the general habit of a society which no longer knows whether or not it wishes to produce. No more moves of production and no more contents of production. National balance sheets now merely retrace a numerical and statistical growth devoid of meaning, an inflation of the science of accountancy over which we can no longer even project the fantasy of the collective will. American Psycho illustrates this with chilling clarity. Bateman and his colleagues dine in exclusive restaurants, frequent high-end clubs, and obsess over business cards. Yet there's no real work process to be seen. Social structures appear as immutable laws of nature, forced to which one simply has to adapt. So the stock market, the financial system, Bateman's entire reality, each functions as an autonomous mechanism, and Bateman adapts by wearing the right suits, carrying the right credit cards, and being seen in the right places. And at one point, the novel makes this painfully clear when his only real concern was whether he could get a reservation at Dorsia. And there's therefore no alternative. There's no action, only participation, because the system goes on with or without him. And his job is not only meaningless, it is non-existent. Bateman is not only alienated from his work, he is doubly alienated from it, for his labor itself is obscured, intangible. We never see him produce anything, nor do we have any real connection with what he's supposed to be dealing with. Instead, we witness the barren landscape of the financial world, a place where nothing of substance happens, where money circulates for its own sake, while actual production has long been outsourced. And capitalism reduces people to mere cogs in a machine that no one fully understands, yet it continues to drive anyone forward. I want to fit in. Films like Wall Street embody the greed is good mantra that dominated the 1980s. But Ellis goes further. It's no longer just about greed or the pursuit of profit. The yuppies of American Psycho are young, health-conscious, and obsessed with self-optimization. And yet they also have no real choice. Anything that doesn't serve self-expression or capital accumulation is simply discarded. Bateman's obsessive self-discipline is therefore evident from the very first pages, when he describes his morning grooming routine in painstaking detail. And when he writes, in the shower, I use first a water-activated gel cleanser, then a honey almond body scrub, and on the face an exfoliating gel scrub. Vital Sassoon shampoo is especially good at getting rid of the coating of dried perspiration. Salts, oils, airborne pollutants, and dirt can weigh down hair and flatten it to the scalp, which can make you look older. And this goes on for pages. Ellis overloads the text with brand names, creams, scrubs, lotions. Bateman meticulously explains how he takes care of his body, how he grooms himself, and actually today such descriptions seem almost commonplace. We hear them all the time from influencers. But in the early 90s, it was something completely new, especially for men. And the yuppies of that era were young, ambitious, and highly educated. They saw the world as nothing more than a stage for their own self-expression. And Bateman, in his radicalized form, embodies this obsession. And you can also see this when his girlfriend asked him, Patrick, she says slowly, if you're so uptight about work, why don't you just quit? You don't have to work. Because, I say, staring directly at her, I want to fit in. He doesn't just say this because he just wants to belong. He wants to become the ideal of this environment. But this self-optimization and adaptation is empty. It's just a facade. Marx analyzed commodity fetishism in Capital, so the idea that commodities are not just useful objects with exchange value, but that they develop an almost mystical aura. And Baudrillard takes this idea of Marx a step further, and in a hyper-mediated consumer society, Baudrillard argues, material things also lose their meaning. Commodities no longer exist as objects, but as pure signs. And what counts is no longer their functionality, but their symbolic value. So an object is valuable not because it is useful, but because it signals prestige within a particular code. And Bateman exists entirely within the simulacrum. His identity is made up of brand names, status symbols, and consumer goods, valued not for their material value, but for their place in the social hierarchy. And he doesn't just wear a suit, he wears Armani. He doesn't just wear a tie, it's Valentino. Similarly, he dines in all these extravagant restaurants, not because he enjoys the food. In these also, the plates are often left untouched, also the champagne bottles are unopened, because these experiences only have symbolic value. They signify his membership of an elite class to which he desperately wants to belong. So these names do not refer to real things. They are symbols of a hyper-real order in which social belonging is negotiated through signs. And Bateman consumes designer clothes, fine food, and fitness programs not out of necessity, but because without these markers, he ceases to exist. His body itself becomes a commodity, a disciplined object that must constantly display perfection as a status symbol. He treats his physique also as an endless project, but there is no authenticity, no vitality in it. It's not about health here, it's about status, and yet that status is inescapable. Modern power does not enforce obedience by force. It makes you believe while you discipline yourself. And this obsessive self-optimization runs through the whole novel. The gym sessions, the immaculate outfits, the endless waiting list for the perfect restaurant reservation. It is all a ritual of social belonging. Every character in American Psycho follows the same uniform lifestyle, the same relentless ambition to the point where they become interchangeable. Clones responding only to external stimuli. And this is also why they constantly mix up their names. And Bateman himself, he suffers. His paranoia, his panic attacks, whether over the wrong face mask or an inferior business card, all stems from his constant fear of exclusion. Because in this world, to lose your place in the system is to cease to exist. When morality becomes a status symbol. And one of the most iconic and revealing scenes in American Psycho is when Bateman sits with his friends in an absurdly expensive restaurant and delivers a long-winded monologue about all the world political problems. So he says, well, we have to end apartheid for one, and slow down the nuclear arms race, stop terrorism and world hunger, ensure that a strong national defense prevents the spread of communism in Central America, work for a Middle East peace settlement, prevent US military involvement overseas. We have to ensure that America is a respected world power. And he goes on like this for pages. His friends nod politely, seemingly impressed, but his speech is nothing more than a jumble of unrelated talking points. stitched together like lines from a magazine, delivered with cold detachment. Bateman doesn't express any real convictions. He constructs a catalogue of values, a patchwork of left, liberal, and conservative positions, but he's not interested in changing the world at all. He's interested in the performance. How moral do I sound? How intellectual? How convincing? Bateman's words ring hollow, empty phrases that fit seemingly into a world where even politics has become just another status symbol. Responsibility is consumed like art, like music or luxury goods, and no one asks if you're really believing what you're saying. It's not about convictions anymore, it's about appearances. And the scene perfectly illustrates how politics becomes just an accessory. Moral issues are here discussed not out of genuine concern, but as a way to project worldliness and responsibility. And this moment is so striking because at first glance it seems also out of place. Like, why should a serial killer who tortures and murders people suddenly start preaching about human rights? But this is where Ellis' biting social critique lies. This horror isn't buried deep, it's just below the surface. The system allows everything to appear civilized and ethical on the outside, while behind closed doors, or even in plain sight, the most brutal cruelty takes place. And Alex exposes an elite that, despite its immense wealth, needs no justification for existence, yet desperately clings to some form of legitimacy. Like, look at us, we are responsible. We care about the world, but of course no one is actually saved. This scene resonates to all of us so much, because everyone knows these conversations that doesn't feel like an exchange of ideas, but a scripted routine, words that aren't real thoughts but only slogans, borrowed opinions. No one actually means what they're saying. It's not true, but because it sounds good to others. No actions, only reactions, no real people, just stimulus response machines. And that's exhausting. It wears you down. It builds up frustration and quiet anger. And because, yes, on the surface, Patrick's life seemed desirable. The stylish apartment, the prestigious job, most people would be tempted to trade places with him. But would they swap places with his colleagues? With these conversations? With this world where no one listens? No one speaks, and no one really has anything to say? Probably not. Something horrible was happening. Anyone who reads American Psycho is confronted with explicit, graphic violence. Bateman's sadistic murders form the shock core of the novel, but Ellis does not present this violence as a mere aberration or a cheap thrill. It is a symptom of a deeper emptiness and serves therefore a critical function. And as you read, you are drawn in, almost against your will. Eventually, you begin to feel what Bateman feels. The endless monotony, the banality, the repetitive routines, the sheer emptiness becomes suffocating. It makes you anxious, restless, even depressed. Eventually, you begin to think like Bateman. It's inevitable, because the real horror isn't the violence, it's the crushing boredom, the passive, hollow existence, the deep existential emptiness that breeds destruction. And Bateman starves intellectually in a world of excess. This boredom is his pain. Nothing stimulates him. There's no real inspiration, no meaningful activity to bring him to life. And without external stimulation, man withers. Without the inherent joy of real creation, artistic expression, or productive engagement, they spiral into meaninglessness and psychological decay. Modern humans are like zoo animals, materially provided for, but psychologically miserable for lack of true freedom. And Bateman is constantly occupied. He works out, consumes, he meets people in fancy restaurants, but this is not real action. It's pure reaction, like a machine on autopilot, driven by social norms and a silent fear. There's no real human energy, no authentic emotion, and you feel this when he says, I had all the characteristics of a human being: flesh, blood, skin, hair. But my depersonalization was so intense, had gone so deep, that the normal ability to feel compassion had been eradicated, the victim of a slow, purposeful erasure. I was simply imitating reality, a rough resemblance of a human being with only a dim corner of my mind functioning. Something horrible was happening, and yet I couldn't figure out why. Patrick exists, but he does not live. The same conversations, the same routines, the same bars, restaurants, and gyms. Every surprise is stifled before it can happen. And he kills time with porn and parties, desperately trying to escape the painful question of who he really is, because he only knows what he is. A thing, a collector of possessions, achievements, and experiences. And he's abnormal in a system where the normal people are the sickest, because they don't even realize that something is deeply wrong. But Bateman does, and his symptom is the urge to kill. His sadism is nothing more than a desperate need for control. Feeling powerless in his own life, Bateman reduces his victims to objects. He tortures and murders homeless people, treating their suffering as his last remaining source of intensity. And yes, it's cruel, it's repulsive, but what's even more disturbing is the idea that his violence barely registered in his world. It's as if it's just another product to be consumed. And the appalling banality of this novel lies in the fact that Bateman describes pop music with the same obsessive detail as he does mutilation and murder. Everything is the same. Everything is expressed in the same empty, detached tone, and even his victims are measured by the market value. In Bateman's world, the only thing that exists is what can be sold. If something doesn't turn a profit, it has no value. And here it's not about greed, it's not about the hunger for more money that drives him, although that hunger exists. Profit is simply the logic that subtly dictates everything in this world, and by that logic, a homeless person is worthless. Anyone on the margins of society ceases to exist, and this is Bateman's dilemma. He killed to feel something, but he remains trapped in a numbing paralysis. The violence in American Psycho is depicted in grotesquely detailed, almost pornographic depth, not just to shock, but to expose the total commodification of horror itself. I have to return some videotapes. And for me, the most iconic motive in the novel is Bateman's recurring phrase when he says, "I have to return some videotapes." And this is so absurd and funny at the same time. I mean, in his world where he theoretically has everything at his disposal, money, status, time, he escapes into such a trivial obligation. And this is precisely this banality that makes this motive so powerful. It becomes almost a running gag, but one that leads even deeper into the real tragedy of the novel. He says that after murders and psychotic breakdowns, that he needs to return videotapes. Bateman has no other way out. He cannot escape the straitjacket of superficiality, of clinging to routines and socially prescribed behavior to avoid falling into utter emptiness, or even face the terrifying freedom he actually has. And Ellis takes this idea further when Bateman delivers endless monologues about 1980s pop music. Phil Collins, Whitney Houston, Hugh Lewis in the news. He talks about them with pompous expertise, with rattling of sales figures, supposed musical depth, cultural significance, as if he had memorized musical magazines from cover to cover. But we quickly realize that this is not someone who really feels the music. Pop music isn't deep. It's designed to sell. So there are no real emotions, only manufactured ones. And this is Adorno's concept of the culture industry in its purest form. art is no longer understood as an expression of personal experience. It is consumed as a product, standardized, superficial, devoid of any real connection to the inner self. And Bateman? He is the end product of the system. He doesn't experience music, he categorizes it. He evaluates it not by emotion, but by status. And another motive that recurs throughout the whole novel is Les Miserables. Bateman constantly notices posters, flyers, graffiti. The word Miserables appears everywhere, as if Hugo's novel of poverty and social justice has been reduced to mere decoration. It's also just another consumer item. Les Miserables is no longer seen as a work that challenges and provokes. It has been reduced to a mere symbol. It's a piece of urban scenery that no longer elicits any real response.
I killed Paul Owen, or did I?
One of the things that make American Psycho so confusing is that no one wants to acknowledge Bateman's crimes. He even tries to turn himself in several times. He calls his lawyer and confesses to the murders, but his lawyer just laughs, assuming it's a joke, and that's ideology. Ideology here isn't just false consciousness in the classic sense. It's an active refusal to know. People may sense that something is wrong, but they cling to the surface of things so as not to disturb their comfort in the illusion of order. And American Psycho takes this idea to its absolute limit. The system must not be disturbed. As long as everyone keeps going, following the rules of competition, nothing else matters. And Bateman's murders are the hidden, the dirty side of capitalism. A truth that everyone suspects but refuses to admit. And those around him see the signs but they don't react. And just as in the real world, we see the cracks in the system, but we choose to ignore them. And this is ideology in its purest form, knowing that something is deeply wrong but pretending not to notice, because otherwise you'd have to do something about it. And Patrick is trapped in this never-ending cycle. Even murder and even confession get him nowhere. And so the novel ends with its now iconic final words.
This is not an exit.
This is a clear reference to Sartre's three claws, where three people trapped in a room with no way out. And the same goes for Bateman. He is living proof of this. Neither his money nor his self-discipline allow him a real life. He feels nothing but a constant, sharp inner emptiness. No matter how or what he confesses, no matter how many atrocities he commits, there is no way out, no escape from the ideological machine, no redemption through murder, no self-discovery through violence. An American Psycho is not a novel to be read for entertainment. It provokes, shocks, and forces readers out of their moral comfort zones. And those who only know the business card scene or dismiss it as a mere satire of yuppie capitalism, they fail to appreciate the literary risk Ellis actually takes. Because the novel captures the apogee of a triple capitalism dream in which status, consumption, and objects provide the only sense of meaning, while the individual himself fades into nothingness. And here, no exit means that we remain trapped in our actions, unable to recognize our own freedom. But yet, there is one scene that seems to break the cycle. It's actually an often overlooked moment, but perhaps the most profound in the whole novel. So Bateman meets a young, beautiful girl in the streets. She's sitting on a stool reading Sartre. She's completely unimpressed by his status and wealth, and he assumes she's homeless and gives her $1. And for a moment, he feels something almost like pity. But then she snaps at him and says, "Hey, what's your goddamn problem?" Because she's not homeless, she's a student at Columbia University. And this moment is left open. A fleeting encounter, a tiny crack in Bateman's carefully constructed facade. Perhaps this girl represents the opposite of everything the novel has shown so far. Perhaps she doesn't read satire as a status symbol, but out of genuine curiosity. And for her, culture is not an object of prestige, something to show off in social circles, but a horizon of possibility, a way to connect with the world and understand it. She thinks and she reflects. And perhaps in this brief moment, Alice is quietly suggesting that the novel isn't entirely hopeless, that there are people who don't blindly buy into the capitalist machine, who think more deeply, who don't just skim the surface. But just as quickly as this humanity appears, it disappears again, without comment, lost in the anonymity of Bateman's everyday life, because for Bateman, there's no exit. He has theoretical freedom, access to everything, but he is afraid of this freedom. He escapes into superficiality and sadism. He also admits that he has no alternative. When he said, "I want no one to escape," but even after admitting this, and I have countless times in just about every act I've committed, and coming face to face with these truths, there's no catharsis. I gain no deeper knowledge about myself, no new understanding can be extracted from my telling. There has been no reason for me to tell you any of this. This confession has meant nothing. Bateman remains trapped in a city that either doesn't see his violence or refuses to see it. And so American Psycho is much more than the story of a serial killer. It is a moral spotlight on the hollowness of late capitalism, one that forces us to look in the mirror. And for as long as we consume, as we function, mindlessly repeat phrases, see culture as a commodity, judge fashion and people by their symbolic value, without asking ourselves if we are still capable of love, feeling, or independent thought, we are all, in some way, Patrick Bateman. And in the end, it leaves us with one haunting question. Is there really no exit?